Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a ranking video for the Shannara book series by Terry Brooks. This is the first epic fantasy series I ever got involved with. It was not the first series I finished. The first series I finished was The Wheel of Time, and that's still, I would say, my favorite series, but the Shannara series still has a special place in my heart for the type of classic fantasy feeling that all of the books have had. There have been many permutations and changes in the series, several tonal shifts, but still the basic premise has always been the same with the Shannara books. And it's always elves and dwarves and magical creatures and epic world building. And so I've really enjoyed the Shannara series, and so I'm going to be providing my ranking of the books and the series. Now I have some qualifications on how I'm ranking this because I'm not doing straight just the books, and I'm also not doing just the series. So there's kind of a mix and match that I'm doing. So some of the series, and I would say most of the series, are very cohesive, whereas the first book compared to the second, compared to the third in a trilogy, let's say the Voyage of the Geraldine Shannara trilogy, or the High Druid of Shannara trilogy, those feel very cohesive as books, and I almost view them, the trilogy, as a single piece, not just as the three parts. So I'm talking about those as the whole trilogy. So they'll just be the whole trilogy as one of the ranks on here. At the same time, there are others that aren't quite so cohesive, and there is one specifically that I'll mention, and that is the original trilogy, the Shannara trilogy, that includes the Sword of Shannara. It also includes Elfstones, and also includes Wish Song. And because these books are each very different, they have a complete story in and of themselves that don't require the other ones, I'm not going to be ranking them together. I'm doing them individually. So, therefore, one last thing, I have the last couple of books I have not read. You have the trilogy and the last tetralogy, the last ones that were published, as well as the kind of prequel-ish type trilogy, the Running with the Demon series. It's a bit the Word in the Void. That's what it's called. The Word in the Void. I have not read those yet. I do intend to read those. That's kind of like a prequel-ish to the Shannara series, but so I haven't read those, so I can't include those in my rankings. So as a result, there will be 10 on this list, and so I'm going to start from my number 10 and work the way up. And so my number 10 is The Legends of Shannara duology, which includes Bearer of the Black Staff and The Measure of Magic. Now, this was a duology that had excellent potential to be a good series. This is one of the kind of prequel books that's explaining how the Shannara world came together. And there's a promise made at the beginning of it is all the characters, they're in this dome. They are kind of, they're stuck there, and the evil creatures are trying to make their way in the dome. These people need to break out. They need to go to the different parts of the land, and they need to expand their population. And that's the basic premise. And unfortunately, Terry Brooks never delivers on that premise. He should have had a third book which shows them going out, but it really feels like a trilogy that was just cut short after book 2. And I don't know why, because all the books were New York Times bestsellers. I believe just about every single book of the Shannara series was a New York Times, if not every single one, was a New York Times bestselling book, and they all made money. So I don't know why you would cut it off. So it doesn't make sense that I just think he just didn't write the story and finish it out. And so it was promises were made and the payoffs were not there, and it was incredibly frustrating. Now, there are elements in the first book that I really did like, but unfortunately they just aren't paid off in book 2, and as a result I don't really want to revisit book 1 because of that. And so that is why it is number 10 on this list. It is the only bad series on this list. And then my number 9 is the heritage of Shannara or Shannara. I'm gonna go back and forth. I go back and forth all the time on the pronunciations. I'm sorry about that. The heritage of Shannara series that includes 4 books. It's a tetralogy. It includes the Scions of Shannara, the Druid of Shannara, the Elf Queen of Shannara, and the Talismans of Shannara. This is actually, so one of my close friends whom I got to read the Shannara series, he really likes the Heritage series. He really enjoyed it. I did not, because I felt it very bland. A lot of the elements were just retreads of the original series, but expanded upon in some ways. And this series at least pays off what it promises. But it doesn't feel like it's an epic enough scope. It feels like it's you have a bunch of characters, and rather than turn into this big epic like something like Lord of the Rings becomes, or something like Narnia becomes, it feels very much individual character based, kind of like Game of Thrones, and it never arises to the epic quality that I hoped it would in this trilogy. Oh, sorry, in this quadrilogy, quartet. I'll call it a quartet. And so I find this to be the most bland of the series. It just feels like he is doing safe stuff the whole time. There are cool elements where in the book 3, the Elf Queen, we are exploring into the Blue Divide, and they have to go to that island where Arberlon has disappeared to. And that was an interesting concept, that they're going to basically bring Arberlon back. But the problem is it just wasn't fun. It felt like, okay, well, this is a middle chapter. It didn't feel like exciting. And because each book basically follows a different character, even though it has to do with the whole group, it just felt off. It felt like this was not a well-planned, well-thought-out quartet. Why is it so hard to say that? Anyway, and so that's why that's the number 9 on my list. Although I will say there are a few epic moments in this quartet that are really worth standing alone in the saga. Now we get to the number 8, and this is the first book I'm going to include in the standalones, and that is The Wish Song of Shannara. This is, of the original 3, I think the weakest, but this is the book that has quite a lot of impact on the future. Cogline is introduced in this book, and he's incredibly important in the later books. You also have important character work with Alanon. Some of Alanon's best character work is in this book. He's such a good heroic leader, the wise character, and this book I think is his personal best. And then this book also has some interesting villains, and it shifts the perspective into the Westland, or into the dwarfs in the Eastland as opposed to the elves in the Westland. So it provided a good change of pace. The problem is, much like the Heritage series, it is very bland. It did not, to me at least, I know other people liked it more, but to me I thought it was the blandest of the original 3. And so it tells a good story, and I do like where some of the characters end up. This book brings back one of the Lees, who was unfortunately missing in the Elfstones book. So it brings back the Lees, who are, the Lee family is some of my favorite characters. They're always the fun Han Solo rogue-ish kind of characters, and I always enjoyed them. So that's my number 8. My number 7 is the High Druid of Shannara, and this was a series with interesting promises. This has 3 books in this trilogy. You have Jaka Rus, you have Tanaquil, and you have Stricken. And I'm sure I pronounced all those wrong, but whatever. This is a trilogy where when I was reading it, I was really surprised in some of the directions. This trilogy has basically kind of purgatory hell involved, and it really changes the nature of how the Shannara series worked. And I remember flipping open and seeing the maps in this trilogy. And I was like, really? That's interesting. And then I kept reading and I was like, oh my, that's interesting. And when the head of the Druids is essentially banished down to this kind of hell, purgatory, and our main character, who's in Almsford, he has to go and rescue her. And along in his attempt to go and rescue her, he's chased down by the other Druids who are not fans of this. And he is also, he meets this blind girl and has just a wonderful story with her. And there are some fantastic elements of this series, the character work. This is the one series where the parents of most of the main characters are usually like 17, 18 years old. They're right at that coming of age era. And the parents are always missing. They're either dead or they never go along, and so they stay home or whatever. This was one of the few trilogies where the parents were involved, and it totally changed the name of the game for the way this book handled. And basically, the kid goes after his aunt, and then the parents go after the kid who's going after the aunt. And it just provides a really fun dynamic in the books. Unfortunately, it doesn't hit the deeper themes that some of the other books do, and also doesn't have the right scope. And I would even say does not deliver all of the promises, although this one does deliver on more promises than the previous books pay off. And so I think this is a very strong trilogy. And so now we get into my number 6, which is another of the standalones in my list, which is Elfstones of Shannara. This is going to be very controversial because so many lists I've seen have listed this as the number 1 book. People love this book. It's among most of the people I know, it's their favorite. And that's there's a very obvious why. It has kind of a difference to it that completely throws everyone off. You have an Almsford boy as the main character, but you also have Amberla, who is essentially the female lead, and she has dramatic importance to the story. And there are it's a book that really shows that Terry Brooks can write a wide type of book series. He can write a traditional book like the Sword of Shannara, and he can write a more modern book in its design, and they were written one right after the other, like they're back to back. So it is interesting how different they are, yet still part of the same series. And this book works well because of the intense emotion that it gets from the reader, as well as the intense plot that is happening. This book introduces demons, which are really creepy. Let me say, really creepy in the book. And they're not my favorite villains, but I thought they were handled very well by Terry Brooks. I would trust Terry Brooks with writing demons than any other author, probably, because I know he's very careful in how he writes. And also, I have to say, I was appalled at the TV show. I watched all of it, both seasons. I thought that the first season I thought was bad. I didn't think it was the worst thing I've ever seen, but I thought it was very bad, very poor adaptation. Although I did like the idea of spreading it out, but I thought the second season was abysmal and was really disappointing that even got made. But I do like the actors involved. There were some great actors involved, including John Rhys-Davies in the first season. So that's my number 6. So we're getting into my top 5, and these are all very well done series, and all very different, which makes me excited. My number 5 is the Genesis of Shannara series. This is the book series that made me go, whoa, where did that come from? Because it's essentially an apocalyptic series. Yes, there are elves. Yes, there is magic. But really, this is an apocalyptic trilogy. This is not a fantasy. If you want to introduce someone to fantasy, do not give them this trilogy. Give them the other Shannara books, but don't give them this one, because this trilogy is basically most people on Earth die, and a new society is created, and these children are basically trying to escape this new society and try to escape to a better society. And this includes 3 books. You have Armageddon's Children, The Elves of Sintra, and the Gypsy Morph. Elves of Sintra I thought was the best, of the three, but all three books were really good. And this trilogy shows really some of the best romance that Terry Brooks is able to write with some of the main characters, but also the characters are so complex. One of the characters reveals that she's pregnant, and all of a sudden it throws off how the other characters react to her and how she reacts to the world. There is basically a tonal shift that everything's so bleak and dismal, whereas there's lots of hope in the other Shannara series, but this one is a very bleak trilogy, yet still told very well, and by the end of the trilogy has a very, very interesting climax and ending, which I thought was very fascinating. And so my number 4 is The Dark Legacy of Shannara. And this was the series that when I read the write-up on it, I was like, this is what I'm looking for. And I looked, and the interior artwork on the books, I was like, yeah, here we go. Wasn't entirely that. It was much more in line with a lot of his other books. But what made this series so high for me was it was very tonally consistent among the 3 books, and it felt, the world building felt very, very good in this book. I would actually equate this trilogy to the Forgotten Realms in a way. It has a similar tonal feeling. I would say this trilogy has more of a tonal feeling to the Forgotten Realms than any other Terry Brooks work. So I really enjoyed this one. The plot and the action in this one is the best. I just think the character work is weaker than some of his other works, but the plot is phenomenal. It's really good here. And some of the stuff I really like about it are spoilers, so I won't get into that. My number 3 is my favorite series in the Shannara series. It has amazing characters, amazing action, amazing plot, amazing world building, amazing twists. There was some twists in this trilogy that I was like, that's brilliant! And some great themes, some great redemption, and some great cohesiveness. This is the most cohesive in terms of plot, and that would be the Voyage of Geraldine. And what's so cool about this is you have flying ships, and I don't mean like spaceships, I mean literally, like imagine an old like ship from like Pirates of the Caribbean, imagine it flying, like Peter Pan style. Fantastic usage in this book. It is such a visually stunning book when you try to picture the visuals that he creates. This is his best work at making the reader really see what's happening on the page. And the characters are great. There is a dynamic between 2 characters, and when I first read it, I was like, that's a little disturbing. She's a little bit older than him. I'm not sure how I feel about this. And as I kept reading, I was like, oh, this is really well done. I was very impressed by it. And some great character work, great exploration. This expands the map quite a bit in this series. You know how I talked about the Heritage series had a little bit of a hint that the world is larger than just what's on the 4 lands map. And this trilogy blew that away and showed all the big history, and also shows a hint at where the world used to be pre-Shannara, which is really fascinating. And so I can't gush about this trilogy. It has the Isle Witch, Anthrax, and Morgawar. Fantastic books, all 3 of them, and I will say the best villains in Shannara. I am gushing about this trilogy. I love this trilogy. And then we get to my number 2. This is the big prequel book. It is The First King of Shannara. This is the book that struck the tone that I was hoping for going in. I went in thinking it was going to be one thing, and I left feeling I got exactly what I wanted. This is a book that came out before the Star Wars prequels, but actually kind of feels tonally consistent with the Star Wars prequels. There is some characters who have some of the druids have a fear that this other politician is building up an army and they try to convince everyone, hey, we need to fight against him. And everyone else is like, nah, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. And then the army strikes, and everyone's like, oh no! And there's some cool revelations, some characters show up, some major important ties to the overall universe are established in this book. And also it just has some epic action scenes, some epic fight scenes, and some cool kind of Easter eggs to the original Sword of Shannara novel. And I love the cohesiveness between the two books. And so First King is one that I'm like, man, that just would make an epic 3-hour blockbuster movie. So that is a fantastic book. And it has some interesting themes about parentage, about fathers and sons and fathers and daughters that are raised in this trilogy that I really like. So not this trilogy, that's a book. Man, I'm all over the place today. But my number one, probably not going to surprise anyone, but probably is going to be also pretty controversial, is The Sword of Shannara. It is by far my favorite of Terry Brooks's books. It's the first one he wrote, and it is, I read it, and it was the first ever fantasy novel I read, unless you count like The Hobbit when I was a kid. This is the first real fantasy novel that I finished as a teenager, and I was enthralled by the book. Absolutely, positively enthralled. The way that Terry Brooks writes the story just like The Lord of the Rings, but is much more fast-paced, much more interesting to me, and doesn't feel like I'm reading a history book. You know, Lord of the Rings feels like, and this character, who's the son of this character, who feels like, who did this, and this land, which is connected to this land. No, this is just a fun fantasy adventure. This is like a D&D campaign, but it's Lord of the Rings and D&D combined, and you get these characters. There's the villain. They have to get the sword. They have to go off on this adventure. Things happen. They get separated. And the main character has to discover truth. And it's just such a warm, fun read. Does not feel like if you read a modern fantasy novel, like say the Poppy War, you know, you read The Sword of Shannara, you're gonna get absolute tonal shift. And these are both epic fantasies, because the genre has evolved and changed so much. And I think the Poppy War trilogy is really good. I'm gonna be reading the third book soon, but it just shows how different. And this was 1977. And I believe this was around 2018, 2017. So it shows that in only about 40 years, we had this massive change in the genre. And I absolutely love everything about this book. I've reread it. I believe I've read this 3 times now, and every single time I enjoyed reading it. I don't intend to read it again soon, but I love this book. So that is my ranking of all of the Shannara books, asterisk, that I've read. I loved them all. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've read any of the Shannara books, let me know what you thought. What'd you think of the TV show? Let me know down in the comments down below. If you're a fan of the series, what do you think of the later books that I haven't read, or his other spin-offs, or even his entirely other series, the Magic Kingdom of Landover series? Let me know all those thoughts down in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel for more fantasy, sci-fi, tie-in books, lots of videos on books. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.